333. Merry Crowmas. Boys, it's prototype number 37. And if you're a donor, then you get this episode on Christmas Eve because that's when I'm recording it. But for everybody else, it's dropping on Christmas. And you know, because this is episode 37, because this is an episode where I was just expecting that, like, oh, the number count is pretty high, let me go back and look. What did I do? Did I already use A Very Merry Crowmas as an episode title for the last Christmas? No, it turns out we started this show in February of this year. February 19th was when the first episode went live. So that's actually surprising. I wasn't expecting that, but here we are. And honestly, in some ways, a lot has changed. In other ways, not a lot has changed. But we'll go over the sort of year in review, retrospective and stuff in a separate episode of this show. It might be something that airs before the end of the year, or it might be something that happens at the very beginning of the year. You know, like it might air on the 1st or 2nd or something like that. But, you know, I wanted to stave off the retrospective, the sort of analysis of the whole year and the thinking about like how good we are and how epic everything is and how grateful I am for everybody. I wanted to save all of that, as genuine as it is, for after Christmas, you know, after the family stuff is all over and after we just enjoy things, right? So let's do that. Let's just enjoy things, and let's talk a little bit about the show topic list that we've got here. We are going to be summarizing the week's CMBW developments, you know, the developments since the last episode. We're going to be previewing a very exciting event, the Winter Invitational, an underclass tournament. I expect some very silly games out of that, and that will be live on the 30th of December, so mark your calendars, of course. We're going to think a little bit about other one-off events we might be doing, maybe sooner rather than later, because unfortunately, a lot of the people that I thought would be interested in playing in this were not able to make it, or, you know, didn't sign up fast enough or whatever, and, you know, that's just down to scheduling, but we'll talk a little bit about that. You know, maybe we can have more of these sort of underclassmen events and stuff. We are also going to dive into some faction unit concepts and some advancement, some additions into the tech tree, some things that we want to add. So all of that stuff. And then, of course, we have the coffee questions, where if you donate at least $3 a month on our coffee page, which is linked in the description, you get to ask me questions, and I answer them in this episode. When we do Crow's Nest episodes, we will also, of course, Veek7 and myself will also be answering those kinds of questions. When we get around to recording another one of those, which I think will probably be soon, and maybe we'll even be covering things like, you know, how the year went and what we're planning on next year as a duo, as a team, as opposed to just, you know, what am I thinking about specifically doing, right? So that's obviously, this is the solo show. Veek has actually made it to a couple of these, I think a pair of these this year, which is kind of funny. But when it comes to the Crow's Nest episodes, yeah, those are our two-man shows. Those are our duo podcast, and that is, of course, on the No Frauds Club YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and relive those days, you can do that for now and keep watch for future content episodes. But I can't promise anything because that obviously is contingent on Veek's availability. I can't promise the exact time, but that is something that is or was planned anyway. So we'll see how that one goes. So let's start off summarizing the developments of Cosmonarchy Brood War and related to Cosmonarchy Brood War, Cosmonarchy Brood War accessories. I have an exciting announcement to make, which is that Lakizilisks now actually benefit from weapon range upgrades. Can you believe that? But there was a number of other things that occurred. Obviously, this is the week of balancing, right? This is the week where we started off a bunch of balance adjustments and changes. We revamped things about Zerg, where they have a 1.5 tech optional tech thing that they can do. OGs may remember that the Irulent Evoa and the Othstal Oviform used to actually exist, or I guess it was the Orboth Omlia, actually. So the Irulent Evoa and the Orboth Omlia used to be tier 2.5 and tier 3.5, and you used to be able to basically skip them if you wanted to, right? And so it was something like, or no, I think you could only skip the Irulent Evoa if you wanted to. You could go straight to Othstal from tier 2, but if you wanted your Iral Iris to give you a tech spike a little bit sooner, you could go for the tier 2.5, and that was an added initial cost, right? And so, anyway, at the end of the day, it's not that significant. It wasn't something that we were super happy with in terms of how it played, so we ended up axing it and simplifying the tree in that respect. And, you know, now we have the 1.5, or the 0.5 in general, right, coming back, but it's only at tier 1 right now. However, it does mean that you can make Bactylisks at tier 1. They are a lot squishier than they used to be. And we'll see about that. They're also a bit more gas intensive because they are available at an earlier power spike. So the fact that you can get them for less investment, and also the fact that Hydras themselves are a bit better, means that they're going to cost a bit more. I do think that this means they're going to fall off a lot sooner, which is kind of fair considering they are, tier 1, 1.5 units now. They're available earlier. So because of that, they are statted as more of a tier 1 unit than a tier 2 unit. And maybe we can look into other things that might improve them. Obviously, there are details there should probably be some additional. We've been thinking about this for a while, but maybe there should be more armor rending effects in general. Zerg have the Vithrilisk, but the only way you can splash it onto ground units is if you attack air units over them, and if your opponent is smart, they aren't going to position their army in that way. Or maybe they still want to for one reason or another. Like I think about Clarions, for example. But for one reason or another, they will still change their positioning if necessary. If that kind of thing is presented to them, right? And so when it comes to the armor rend, Zerg doesn't really have a great option for that. Instead, they might go for a plague or a carapace swarm or something to keep their army alive longer so that they can just overcome the statistical advantage of armor. Or there might be other ways that they think about doing that. But beyond that, you think about when it comes to the armor rend of the Terran, it's much more ubiquitous. The Salamander is actually planned to get adjusted so that it applies a polyoid adhesive instead of dealing damage over time in an area field. It just applies a tick every so often or whatever. So that would be the way that we revise that unit at some point. That's not in yet, but that is planned. And then there's a bunch of other things. So anyway, without getting too far ahead of myself and talking about additions to the tech tree or changes or whatever, there's definitely some armor rend concerns there. But the 1.5 tier thing where you get the Vorv and the Nathracor at that tier, and then you get the Skith and the Bactylisk at that tier as well. Those sort of building mutations that you make are more obviously scouted, and so you can kind of tell what your opponent is doing in that sense. I was somewhat tempted to make a similar thing happen for the Zorkis Shroud, but the problem is the Zorkis Shroud is already kind of tier 1.5. Now, this does mean that if you build it, you are cloaking whether or not you are going for an air unit or not. But because that has a much higher cost and time to activate, it kind of feels like, okay, well, Terran, you can put 2 watchdogs in each base easily enough by that point. You can, as Protoss, put down a warden, and in the future, you'll actually want to put down a matrix for that particular reason, because the matrix will also be revised, although it hasn't been yet. And, there's things like that can kind of help you deal with raids from Gorgorkors or whatever. And as Zerg, that's where you're probably going to want to deviate into the Hydras. The Hydra then, if you don't have it by then, is definitely going to help you because you can get Hydras and they have more upfront damage and more armor pen. I think the Gorgorkor at 2 armor. Yeah, it should be at 2 armor right now. And so the Hydra was always pretty good against it because it would always deal full damage. But now it will deal more full damage because its damage was increased, right? And so there's things like that basically I'm gating the Quaseth dominance. I'm reining that in a little bit and then adding in more reasons to go for the other units, but still allowing you to build up a similar composition to what you had previously if you want to commit to that. Now you just need gas to access the Vorvrikor and, of course, to enable the Nathracor as well, which, of course, still costs Vespene. I'm not 100% sure about the Nathracor as a tier 1.5 unit. Maybe it will need some kind of additional benefit, or maybe it will need to be, one of the things that I can think of, obviously, is just fixing their ability to attack without them being super dumb. That would be a really nice improvement, in my opinion. But beyond that, I'm also thinking about okay, the Nathracor is pretty squishy. It stacks up a lot because it's melee. It obviously is going to get slapped around by Splash a lot. Maybe the solution to that is something that actually Mesk proposed. He wrote out I would say a middling length document about things that he would like to change or like to see changed within CMBW. And a lot of it was just stuff that he didn't expect me to do per se, but stuff that he thinks would be, it's just a good idea. It's a good reference point or resource as a designer to think about what other designers and, people who are heavily invested in the project think. It's the same reason why, when Veek suggests things, even if I don't act on that thing and do the exact thing that they say, maybe that still leads me to the right conclusion, because he's been lately saying stuff about the Ecclesiast, and what I did to buff the Ecclesiast was increase its attack rate so that it could get the shield proc more often, but what he would like it to be is something where it just has more healing in general so that it better solidifies the role. And I'm not 100% sure if that would be a positive thing or not, but I'm willing to, entertain that. He's been saying, but the specific mechanism is he's been saying make it AoE or something to do with that. And I think maybe instead of that, you could just increase the heal specifically, which is another suggestion that I think he and other people have had. But anyway, the point is, like, regardless of what I decide to do, if I decide to do anything with the Ecclesiast, it's still helpful to hear about that, right? And so one of the things that was helpful about the MESC document was that, like, he just pointed out a bunch of things that he wasn't happy with or thought could be changed. At least I know as somebody who thinks deeply about this thing, thinks this way and feels this way, and that helps me make better decisions in the future, right? So when we're thinking about it from that perspective, the whole idea of, like, is there too much splash or not? Like, yeah, maybe there is, and maybe reducing that, reducing the need for that first of all, and then reducing the splash after the fact would be good, because the need for that is because you can get a lot of swarming air, and there's not that much of a counterplay to it outside of splash, which feels really binary. And that is in large part due to stacking. And you can't really fix that in Brood War so far as we know. And so the solution has to be some other thing to make it so that maybe it's prohibitive to get a large number of units, and then you don't need splash as much, because the large number of air units in the early stages of the game, where splash is maybe a little bit silly or overtuned, the splash becomes less necessary if you can't get that prohibitive number of air units, right? And so anyway, that's like one option, right? Where it's like you're delaying the response there. Now, if that does happen, then maybe the Nathricor would then be inadvertently, sort of indirectly buffed, because then there's not as many splashes at tier 1, and therefore, or the splashes at tier 1 are not as powerful or whatever, right? And so there's other things like that. Now, also, what's worth pointing out is that Zerg were not the only ones changed. The stim pack duration was cut from 13 seconds to 5, which is a huge reduction in time, but it results in you not being able to stim across the map with one stim pack on maps like Derelict, for example, right? Now, Harakans were also revised to be less of a damage dealer and more of a tank, so they're actually tankier, slower, bigger, and as a result, they also rend armor more consistently, a little bit faster than before, because they attack faster than before, but their weapon damage can no longer deal like varying amounts of damage, basically. So you can always only deal one amount of weapon damage to one unit. And when that is the case, you're looking at, like, dealing, I think it's 8 damage right now. And the idea is that you can deal 8 damage per unit that you hit. And there's no radial splash anymore, no fall off anymore. It's like if you hit for full damage, which actually I need to adjust that on the website as a result. But the idea is that, okay, I can still hit multiple units, but I can't hit the one unit, like a structure, for example, 3 times, dealing, it was times 6 before. So it was like you were potentially dealing, 18 damage or something like that to a unit that hit all 3 times. And that's just silly, right? And that led to a lot of silly things. Now, the Matador and the Durandal also got hit with this adjustment, where flamethrower attacks as a whole are just different now. And so the Matador and the Durandal might need more adjustments, but I would need to see them in action, or maybe not see them at all, and then that would be data as well, where people just have no faith in them, which is an interesting thought. Like, at some point, I would like to... I was talking with Hapsea at some point about doing like a podcast with him or whatever, and I might actually reach out to him for like an interview on the No Frauds Club YouTube channel and talk a little bit about, like, really drill down in RTS design and stuff, right? And that could be kind of interesting, right? And so anyway, that would be a thought where it's like, yeah, let's do an interview with this guy and let's talk about RTS design or whatever, because one of the things that he's noted, and that I've also noted myself, is that there are certain cases where units come out or like a change happens in a balance, and it's like people just assume it's useless, and then it takes somebody else with no preconceptions to try it, make it really work really well, and then use it. But like, as your player base scales up, the number of innovators doing that needs to also go up. Like, the ratio has to be consistent. And it's a lot easier for that to happen when you have a low overall player base. Like when Sipiak shows up and just practices like Quazeth openers versus Gateway, and this has not been changed at all between 6 and 7 as far as the tournaments are concerned, but Ascension 7 comes in and Zerg are just dominating Protoss in the early game, a complete reversal of what we saw previously. It's like, that's because Sipiak has been practicing with another newcomer, iSarcasm, and obviously also It Depends as a Terran. And it's like, these guys just have different ideas of what's possible and what's good and all this other stuff. And essentially that trio of people is enough to completely change how the game is played, because that's how low our player base is right now, right? And so, like, in the future, it'll take a lot more than just 3 people trying this out or doing this one thing or trying to form this belief. They'll buy into the meta a lot harder, right? And as a result, it's a lot more difficult to sort of usurp that and surprise that and supplant that and like change that by play. And so as a result, you might need to do like a minor adjustment or something to a unit just to make people think, oh yeah, it's still viable, or oh yeah, it's still good, or oh yeah, it's worth trying. Because people might just be like, oh, that unit got nerfed, okay, I'm not going to build it anymore. And we kind of saw that with Wraiths for a while, where Wraiths received no buffs between 6 and 7, but Nablime figured out a way to use them. And, you know, Ascension 5 was the main tournament where they were useful. But then Ascension 6 came around, and not really that many Terrans used them. And that was after all of the adjustments. And then without any buffs, right? Like, you know, the Wraiths were still found out to be useful in that sense, which is really cool. I'm sure I'm getting a little bit of history wrong, because I believe Wraiths were actually used on certain maps like Infinite Velocity back when it was the first one and not the second one. Like during Ascension 6 and stuff. I'm sure Wraiths were still used as like a pocket strat, but like we didn't really see them in action in actual tournament games until number 7 rolled around. And that was, you know, that was after people had already started to realize, oh shit, like Wraiths are actually still useful. You can still make them work. And I think that's really cool to see. But that's, again, something that has to happen through people playing instead of like they are dissuaded from trying a unit that is nerfed, right? But yeah, so anyway, enough to say the Matador and the Durandal might need some sort of like minor adjustment to make people build them again if we don't get a lot of new players who try them out and find good use for them. Obviously, I still remember grabbing them, dropping them in my enemy's base and roasting all of their workers, and also destroying argosies with them. Mesk in an FFA has grim memories of that, I'm sure. But then anyway, beyond that, it's like there were some other details as well, right? There's like the Fulcrum itself is cheaper now. So it's 150 minerals instead of 200. That's going to be a big change. You might actually see more mech units in general as a result of that. And there's some other changes in like the later tiers for Terran, but it's actually pretty minor. Terran are going to end up not having a huge number of changes at the end of the day, I think, for this. Although I think technically the Protoss have the least number of individual units changed. But it's pretty close between the two races. Zerg definitely had the most changes. For Protoss, we have a revised Zealot passive. This is something that has been met with mixed fanfare, mixed results or responses. But instead of having movement speed through the Deathless Procession passive, they now have Imperious March, which is a new ability. And it's just +1 armor while their shields hold. So essentially, it's supposed to be that they have 3 shield armor and 2 physical armor, if you want to call that, two health armor. But that's basically the way that you can think of it. So that means that Zealots are much better at dealing with Zetracors and Quasilisks, and they become a lot more about tanking. And if you can keep that healing up with something like an Ecclesiast or a Golem, then you can imagine that they become that much better in general at dealing with those Zerg armies. And they're also, I think, a lot better versus Bio. Now, they aren't as fast. Yes, this is true, but they are still pretty good at like being this sort of wall of power. And I think that is important to keep in mind for Protoss players worldwide. Although I was told that a lot of them switched to Zerg, so maybe there's not that many Protoss players. Maybe Protoss will just have to be Imba forever, and then until people, the people will want them to be good, and so they'll just refuse to play them forever, and then I'll like progressively. It's sort of like the Solarian, actually. Before I revised its role entirely, it's like nobody was building it, so I progressively buffed it, little bit by little bit, but it was like over the time span of like 6 months, and then people started using it. It's like, oh, this unit's fucking busted. It's like, well, yeah, that was a little bit of egg on my face as the guy who kept doing that, but I think mostly the egg was on the Protosses for not ever fucking building them. And that's why I'm a lot more, just one of the many reasons why I'm a bit more on the conservative side when it comes to changes. But we'll see how it goes. And of course, the Ecclesiast, I mentioned that it got an attack speed buff. The Hierophant is now heavier on the minerals and lower on the gas cost. And that is significant because the Hierophant is a very, I would say, like, underutilized unit, but also it's like the skirmishing type unit, right? And it's really good at debuffing its opponent. It's especially good at like trying to catch units, and particularly air units can be easily desynced out of the fleet if you grab like a couple of them with a Hierophant. That can be really effective. You can also task it onto static defense. If you have like 2 or 3 of them, then they can pretty much instantaneously cut the attack rate of the structure. They attack very fast, right? They're also nimble as they are, like they're fast units, right? And so that also contributes. And they will have a new graphic from Balathol pretty soon, which is very exciting. The Idol now has homing on its attacks, so that's great. Some people were... it does still have interception, but it won't miss a target if it, unless something else intercepts it, right? It'll actually follow the target. You can think of it as similar to the Atreus. I just ended up getting rid of the dumb fire for the unit, essentially. Now, there's still dumb fire on the Alexhandr, so it's not like it completely was removed from the race, but I think that is fine. Now, maybe the Alexhandr could get a significant nerf to its attack rate, but could... follow the plasma shell could follow the target, and the idea is that you can like put something else in front of it to respond to that, but like I don't know, that's demanding a lot of micro, so I'm not sure that would be super ideal. We would have to see. Anyway, the Crucible also got heavily revised in this is pending the arrival of the Nexus power field, which we are going to be doing some reverse engineering for. The work on that has already started. And the idea behind the Nexus power field is basically your first structure doesn't have to be a pylon. It still can be if you want to, say, wall in the low ground or something, but that would be one option, right? Now, when it comes to the Crucible, this is definitely a temporary effect, but basically their efficiency is doubling instead of, 25% increase. And this is really, really bad when you're stacking it with defenses. It doesn't stack anymore. So what I should say is it's really bad when you're empowering defenses, because now your engram, for example, literally attacks twice as fast. It's a huge increase instead of just 25%. Like even 25% felt really fucking good for the engram. Now imagine that, but like literally 4x, So it's like, it's pretty intense. So the fact that it no longer stacks is elegant in some ways, because even though I like the idea of infinitely stacking behaviors, in practice they always end up really bad when you have a thing of scale. Like if you can only build like 3 units or whatever, then sure, yeah, infinitely stacking behaviors are just like, I choose to stack this 3 times because the cap is like the number of units or whatever. So you imagine in like a tactical game or like a turn-based game or something, then you can have those infinitely stacking in air quotes because the limiter is actually the number of times you can use this thing. But when it comes to infinitely stacking with no actual reasonable limit, like the limit is like 4,000 units or something, then yeah, that's a little bit different. And so as a result, we are reining those in a little bit. Basically, I still understand where I was coming from when I was thinking, dude, infinitely stacking is just, it's fine. It's like, you have the investment as a part of it, and then, like it's admitting defeat if you remove, if you put a limiter on the number of stacks you can have of a certain thing or whatever. But like in practice, I mean, for one, you get diminishing returns after a certain point, right? So it's like, there's not really a reason to do it. And maybe that was in my head, like why it was fine to keep it. But it's like, it's not very interesting to like, figure out the exact math of like, this is where it's still cost efficient to stack this many times or whatever. And now it's like, I don't know. It's just, it seems actually more elegant, funnily, because I used to think that like putting a cap of how many times you could do something was not very elegant, but it actually seems more elegant in practice because it's like so many other decisions that you're focused on. Do you really want to also be focusing on like infinitely stacking this thing? Like there's a reason why we have a cap on how many workers are efficient on a base. It's because if you could just keep infinitely stacking workers, then that would be kind of lame in the terms of the gameplay. It would be like, instead of progressively trying to increase your resource income by expanding outwards or whatever, you can just do it without expanding. And so that would be lame, right? And so I don't know, there's different ways that it shows up. But that's something that I've noticed about myself as a designer, is I now actually view the binary thing as sometimes more elegant. And so in this case, it's like you put one crucible down and then everything in that area gets the bonus. So they're a lot more expensive now, but the effect is a lot more powerful. And it's at the cost of you not being able to infinitely stack it, but I don't think most people were doing that anyway. I do think this will be absolutely busted when it comes to static defense, and so you should think of this as a very temporary measure, but we will continue to rack our brains because this is something that I've been working on with Veek as far as the design goes. And so we will see how that one works over time. But yeah, that's pretty much the general gist of all of the changes. There were some significant bug fixes. It wasn't just the Lakizalisk stuff. We also fixed a couple of other bugs, like, for example, Swarming Omen was actually a permanent debuff. That's the movement speed increase by units attacked by the Zorustaleth. It doesn't have a read yet, but that is something that we want to make mention of. There was a kind of like some of these rare bugs that showed up that I also fixed, and things that weren't that impactful in the end of the day, like the final tick of a polyioid adhesive not dealing damage, for example, stuff like that. And then, there's some stuff that's related to like endgame units and whatnot. So, stuff that we just never ended up really seeing. And we're also making some progress on custom game modes. We have a new game mode called The Turning. It is a game mode where your fallen units will turn into zombies. And as of today, I've implemented a feature that allows them to roam across the map. So they will essentially just sort of walk around. Now, they don't immediately take aggro and attack or anything, but if you attack them, they will retaliate. And I think it would be cool if they took aggro. That's something that would be nice, but the reason why it doesn't happen right now is actually because they are an extended player, and extended players don't have active vision. So there's some weird internal layer there where it's like, and by extended player, I mean they are a player between the 8th playable player and the 12th player, which is neutral. So 9, 10, and 11, those players they were like partially implemented or whatever, but they, like a lot of the arrays that hold things like vision and resources even, I think, and some other details are, they are only the size, sized appropriately to fit 8 players. And we would have to do a metric crap ton of reverse engineering to be able to allow for more players there. I don't know if it's even feasible. Like I've not even like, I'm not talking about like given enough time or whatever. I mean, like, I don't know if you wouldn't have to just like re-implement a bunch of things from the ground up in order to make extra players work. I honestly have no idea what was done in the past. I mean, like Blizzard themselves didn't actually enable more players. They just converted the like players 9 through 12 into observer slots. Although I actually don't know how they handled the 12th player, because the 12th player is also the owner of the minerals. So I don't know exactly how that works. Maybe they like, no idea, honestly. I have no clue what they must have done internally, but that was with the remaster, right? They managed to do that. And so, that's whatever. But when it comes to the overall setup, I have no idea how we might achieve something like that on our side. So something to keep in mind, something to think about. But yeah, so there's definitely been that. Anyway, we'll continue to upgrade and improve the turning over time. But one of the other things that we've decided is that we want to achieve some option for the lobby host to select like an array of different options. Instead of the turning being a game mode, it should really be like a game modifier. And that should be in conjunction with Massacre and with, Faction Wars and with, what's the other one? Omnipresence and stuff like that. It's like all of these game modes are cool in and of themselves, but why can't we make it so that, for example, you have the turning and Massacre at the same time, or, Omnipresence and Faction Wars at the same time? Like, there's not really any real reason for that. It's just the UI. So I think a focus of us as a sort of team of coders and reverse engineers and all this other stuff, I hope that a focus of ours can be to spend a little bit more time working with reverse engineering the user interface so that we can have things like that, because things like that are pretty important, in my opinion. So with all that said, eventually we should be able to achieve like a randomizer or a selector or whatever for your game modes, like your different game modifiers. And then when you have that in place, and we add like a couple more options, like one of the ideas that we had that Veek suggested, or maybe somebody else suggested, but Veek is a fan of. I don't know I don't know whose original idea it was, but it was Nomad. And Nomad mode is basically you start with a treasury that's lifted, and your spot, you know, maybe your initial start position for this lifted treasury is like randomized or something. But my idea was that, or like the idea of the game mode is that when you land with the treasury, that's you selecting your starting location, and then it converts to your race's town center and your, you know, starting workers and stuff, right? And I think that could be really cool. I had an idea for a game mode called Mercenary mode, where I don't exactly know how, like, what would give you the call downs, but you would essentially get a selection of higher tier units called down to your town center, and you'd be able to pick between, like, say 3 options, and I guess the options would be randomly picked, you know, grabbed from a pool or something. And so as a Terran player, you might get access to a Madrigal, not a paladin, a cataphract, you know, or like maybe like, I don't know, an apostle or something, right? And like those would be the options that you might have at tier 2, at tier 1. You might get that option when you build your first construction, your factory or something like that, right? And I don't know, like there's different ideas that I have with that. Like maybe there's like certain goals that you have. So like when you build your first factory, you get a call down. When you build your first, extra town center, you get a call down. And when you build, you know, I don't know, like when you kill a certain number of units, you might get a call down or something. And, when you achieve tier 2, you might get a call down and stuff like that, right? And so these could be like interesting things, right? It's like, oh yeah, there's different little things. And then maybe like the fun thing too would be if, you know, you add faction wars into the mix. Well, then you'd get the faction specific unit if you got one that was supposed to be potentially factional. Like if you were to imagine getting like a Phalanx as a call down option. Well, if you are the Nidus Trinity, then you would instead get the Tarask, right? And then like you imagine the fun thing could also be like, well, what if you're omnipresence? Well, then maybe you get like a call down option from each race. And, you know, I don't know. There's like different things you could do to combine these, but I like the idea of something like that. I don't know exactly how you would determine it. I probably prefer it to not be so random, but if it's a fun game mode, then it doesn't matter as much. And then, the other one that we have on this list, we actually have a couple of them. So there's Capture the Flag and King of the Hill, which are like, I think those were original modes from Blizzard, or like they were ideas, but like obviously we would want to make it so that they work on any map, like arbitrarily. Like maybe there's like it picks like bases in the center for King of the Hill, and then maybe it picks like the Capture the Flag spot. You know, we would want to make it so that you don't have to like do any extra setup as a mapper. So but maybe you could, and it wouldn't be auto-gened. And as if you specified like this is the spot where the King of the Hill happens. And anyway, like there'd be some benefit for holding it. Like maybe you would get more resources or whatever. And then Capture the Flag, I don't know, like maybe the Capture the Flag thing would be like if you get it, you get like a bunch of resources, or you get a call down, or I don't know. There could be different things, right? And honestly, like if you combine Capture the Flag or King of the Hill with Mercenary mode, then maybe that would also be like, oh yeah, you do one of these extraneous mode objectives. Well, there's another call down for you. I don't know. There's cool stuff like that, right? Symbiosis is the other main one though, and that is basically Archon mode. I think we would like to get that stuff done. So yeah, there's like game mode stuff we'd like to get done, and I think that it would be nice to just have more UI code in general so that we could do certain things, like allow you to maybe pull up the options menu anywhere, at any point in the game just by hitting F10. And then like if you're in the lobby or whatever, you could still do that. And then obviously for like a game mode or like lobby adjustment, like, do certain things in the lobby, that would be really cool too. So keep your eyes out, man. These are things that we want to get done, like the random map selector, for example. That we wanted to add like a tournament support, something where it's like being able to select, like have the lobby host be able to put in the name of the tournament, so Ascension number 7, upper final, so the series name, and then the score. So it's like, we're on game 5, so it's player 1 is 2 for 2 versus player 2, and like that would be the score thing. And then certain details like that. So like being able to add all of this UI stuff, you can find a lot of these details that things we want to add on our Trello page, which I will link in the description. Definitely some stuff to think about though. And then I guess that's probably it for our recap of what's been going on. We have indeed been working on game modes. Like technically new to this version is still Massacre. I look forward to fixing the replays on that so that you can actually cast games from it, but don't know why they break. Who knows? And then, I don't know. Pretty cool shit. Oh yeah, I guess another thing that's related to game modes, it wasn't done this week, but it was done I think the week before, is that Veek was able to re-implement larva spawning stuff so that Omniveil from Omnipresence can spawn larva, and that definitely changes things. So that's pretty cool. All right, that's literally it. That's all I have to say about summarizing the week's CMBW developments. So we get to go on to another topic, which is a very exciting one. It's previewing the Winter Invitational. I think this is going to be one of the most exciting tournaments that we've ever had because it's the most goofiest, or at least on paper. And what I mean by that is that we have the groups here. I can narrate them out to you, but the groups are Group A, Bed, Die, Baylite. Yes, that's a very funny one. Benza, Dead Infested, and Balethal. Those are the players there. Group B is from the Dairy Farm. It's Sipiak, Three Crow, and Heltrix. I think specifically it's going to be really cool to see if Heltrix can proxy Hurakan people again. But Three Crow and Sipiak, I mean, Three Crow's literally just the cheese guy. And then Sipiak is a guy who got cheesed, specifically by Protoss, and that's why he wasn't able to get to playoffs of Ascension number 7. So that's going to be fun. Ancient Lobsters, that's DF, Iskatumesk, and the Beaver 99. This is another group that's like evenly distributed. So actually I should mention Dead Infested playing as random, Benza as Zerg, Balethal as Protoss. So not exactly evenly distributed, where like if Dead Infested was still Terran, then that would be. But Group B is evenly distributed, right? We got Sipiak, Zerg, Three Crows, Protoss, Heltrix is Terran. And then Ancient Lobsters, Group C, is DF, Mesk, and Beaver as Protoss, Zerg, and Terran respectively. So that's another group that is like fully, pretty nice in that respect, actually. So that'll be interesting. And then Group D is random with Keen, Lucifirius, and Concealed Organic, the latter of which is making his competitive debut, just like Balethal, actually. And Concealed Organic is random, but Keen and Lucy are both Zerg. So that's going to be interesting, just because Keen and Lucy have fought against each other, and Keen won every game, but it was when Lucy was Terran. We'll see if his Zerg is going to be up to snuff. He says he's just going to 6-pool everyone. I believe it. And Concealed Organic might roll Zerg, so that could be fun. But this is also all going to go down on the 30th. It is a one-day event. It's exclusively for players who are Class 2s. And yeah, Keen is featured in this tournament because after he got banged out of groups in the last tournament, and considering his availability, I figure, yeah, he's probably a Class 2 player, actually. It's just in terms of the results, where he does fairly consistently, except for Biddy Bee smashing him, he fairly consistently beats the players in Class 2, but he always loses to players in Class 1, and that's sort of like the main thing now. So that's a little bit of a shocker to even see him in this tournament, but it is a legitimate one, I think. I also think that the other guy who stands out here is Sipiak. I think he should win his group pretty convincingly, but if he's having fun with it, if he's going to cheese with it or something, then maybe some funny stuff could happen. And then, yeah, I think Groups A and C are both really interesting, where Benza should win his on paper, but the random Dead Infested and the fact that Balethal hasn't played in a while, hasn't played any competitive stuff at all. I don't even know if he's got a cast over to his name. That could be interesting. And then in Group C, I think DF and Mesk, that's going to be a fun matchup. Can Mesk abuse Protoss with Zerg as, can he try to beat him? Or is, what's that going to look like, right? And so, yeah, this is only a one-day event, but it could also be kind of interesting. Maybe we'll do something on Sunday if everybody is available for it, where it's like the winners of the groups can fight each other in like a weird FFA map or something. I don't know. There could be some details. But definitely some things to think about anyway. And I'm looking forward to that. I think the Winter Invitational is going to be really fun. And I think it's just going to be, it's a for fun event. There's no money on the line, but there's definitely something where it's like, it's exciting to me to see some new players and some, I was hoping to see roller skates in this tournament. I was hoping to see a Nozlix in this tournament, but they did not sign up in time, I guess is the main way to put it, which leads me to my next point, right? Because I was also hoping to see Biddy Bee in this tournament, but he couldn't make it due to family scheduling and stuff. So let's talk about the fact that future one-off events will occur, and I want to see if we can get more of these underclass type tournaments done. In the sort of random, like, I almost like, hey, who's available? Let's make a group or something, and then maybe if it was like a single group, or something. That could be kind of interesting too. Or we could take our existing class 1s as well, and we could say like, because Mr. Meat was saying like it would be kind of cool if he was in a group with like Hupseus Protoss and Hamster Zerg or something, right? And it's like take the top Zerg and the top Protoss and the top Terran and put them in a group, and that could be kind of neat. And I've also been thinking about what might I do? What might I get to work on where it's like an event where we grab some pros from or like some amateurs or some streamers or whatever from different locations, right? And it's like, dude, let me see if I can get like, for example, I know Julian, whose name is Blackman PL on Twitch. He is a pretty reasonable Zerg. He actually defeated Artosis recently in the BSL tournament on Thailand, and so like it could be cool to get somebody like him he's actually aware of the project because I hang out on his stream sometimes, and if I could get him to try this, and he could be the Zerg player that we grab, and then we grab like I don't know, like Terror from Peru, the Terran player. He is also aware of the project, and then maybe like DeWalt or I don't know, like I almost. Like DeWalt is aware of the project, but I would almost feel bad for the other guys if they have to play against fucking DeWalt because he's pretty top tier player. But like it could be him, it could be it could be all sorts of things, right? But I feel like we could grab like a group of like the pros basically and see about them doing things, and it would probably need to be like a money match for them to bother sort of getting out of bed for the tournament, so to speak, right? That's the way the saying goes. But beyond that, it's also like. I don't know if they would have a good time and play good games if they didn't have any experience or practice with it. And so maybe then we should, like, before we even think about getting some of those guys on, I mean, for one, we should implement, for example, the, what would we say? The hockey remapping from remastered, like, achieving feature parity there. We should fix up the installer. We've already started. That's something that I didn't mention in the progress thing, but we've fixed up the installer so that the Defender exception is made. That has not yet technically been tested, but it is something that, like, in theory it should work. So we have to figure out, like, if it does in practice, but we've been making progress on that. I've also made a clean install of StarCraft 1 with no default maps. And that should be a good resource for us to basically download and then use the reg fix to make Windows think that that's where it's installed, and then put the pre-release stuff in, right? So and the release stuff in, like the repos. So do a full installation basically. If we can get it to do that, then we're in luck, because then it's like it handles the exceptions, it installs the old version of the game in a directory that is like say your users/games, and so it's not going to conflict with your remastered installation. And it is going to allow you to play the game, play the mod without any problems. And I feel like that would be amazing if we can do that, because it would take care of the Defender exception. Ideally, it would take care of the firewall exception so that you don't have a problem hosting games, but that's like less important because you can always do that yourself pretty easily. And ideally, it would also, like, if we can figure out what's causing the issues with the PvPGN server, then in terms of its performance and stuff, then we can actually just use that instead of Radman, and that would be pretty cool. So, then we would also ideally be able to not rely on forwarding your ports. I don't think that can be automated because it's like specific to each router and shit, and ISP sometimes. So I don't know about that one. But anyway, maybe it's something where it's like if you download some other VPN than Radman, some other like virtual LAN emulator thing, then that will take care of the forwarding. I don't think so, but I don't know. Like we'd have to see what the solution is to all that, because it has to be scalable and it has to be something that, like, ideally you just do in like one click. Like you run the fraud launcher, you push one button to install the fresh directory and CMBW and put the folder exception in. Ideally before you install CMBW, actually. Put the folder exception in, then install the mod, and then, opt for you to launch the mod, right? So it's actually a fraud launcher, you would think. But yeah, it's not always easy, man. It's not always easy. But that is something that we want to do. And so maybe we would, I think we wrangle all of that before we think about doing the pros. But when it comes to, like, the class ones, we don't want them feeling left out. We've got this winter invitational going on. We should probably have, a a January Invitational or something for the high tier ones. We just go straight into a group stage play. It's like a 1-day event. And I don't know, if you win, you get like $10. That could be something, right? So let's think about that. That could be pretty cool. All right. So with all of that said, I do want to get some, I don't know, I want to get some pretty cool stuff done for the tournaments. I want to get some pretty cool stuff done for events. Like we're talking about the game mode selectors and stuff. That is something that would be really cool to have happen when it comes to the events. But, another thing that would be really cool is I think we should talk a little bit about diving into the tech tree editions, right? I think we should talk about, what kinds of things are missing right now. And I think the Unitary Union for the Protoss, that's going to be a tier 3 robotics structure that will probably have the architect in it, and then the architect will be redesigned to be an actual tier 3 unit as it is. It's pretty powerful as it is, but I think the structure that it comes from is pretty, heavily favored. The Ardent Authority gives you a lot of options, right? And so I was also thinking about like the Clarion. Should the Clarion go to the Unitary Union, or should it go to the Ardent Authority, or what? I think if it goes to the Ardent Authority, you still have a lot of reasons to build that structure. I think you have a lot of reasons to build that structure without the architect in there. But it's something to think about as well. Like maybe the analog stays there, or maybe it goes to the Unitary Union and you put the Clarion there in place of the analog, and then it just has 4 units instead of the 5 that it currently has. And then the Unitary Union would have the mainstay, Assilient, and Vibrance, as well as the architect and analog, I guess, in this situation. Although maybe one of those units that's planned for the Unitary Union could also drop down to the synthetic synod. I'm not 100% sure about that. We'd have to think about it. But like there could be a shuffle there, right? And so anyway, I think that will help out with general like feeling. I mean, it's one more structure. So Protosses that don't like that they have so many structures are not going to like this necessarily. But I think the idea of the Unitary Union being added means that you could, in theory, allow for, I don't know, something where it's like it gives you the option to remember certain details about like your composition, right? And so it's like, okay, the Unitary Union as a standalone thing, you build it for the architects for siege, you build it for some of the other units for like heavier presence of like mechanical stuff. And there's some synergies there with, say, Ardent Authority units. Like there will probably be synergy between the mainstay and the Clarion, or maybe the Assilient and the Clarion. Like there might be certain units that like benefit from having shields up, and then the Clarion keeps their shields up. So it's not an enforced synergy; it's just a synergy that like naturally occurs. So stuff like that, right? And then you'd have a reason to cross-pollinate and build a lot of different structures. Because then you can also get, shields up from things like the Patriarch and the, all sorts of other units, right? The Ecclesias, etc. What else do we have? I think that's pretty much it for the Protoss for now, although the Xenolith is still something I would like to experiment with. It's supposed to be another pylon-type structure. If we are going to continue to revamp and adjust Protoss in general, that would be something to think about. The Zerg obviously have the Tricralgant Chazal, which is a structure that is mutated from the Alcag Eteth, and that is where you get your Kagralisk, Evigralisk, and Omaxilisk from. So those units need mutations, and then they'll stop being orphans, basically, and so you will be able to scale up into Tier 3 with them. There's also the Zobriolisk, a planned mutation from the Likizilisk. There's the Selkaralisk, which is planned to mutate from the Vilgorikor. The Vilgorikor itself is going to have a lot of changes to it. And then the Elthrazilisk, which is planned to go alongside the Estratholeth, aka Defiler. Currently, the Defiler, Estratholeth, is only available from the Elthist Mound. It's the only, you build one tech structure for one unit, and that's obviously not super ideal, but it is a thing. So, we want to sort of pad them up. Basically, once you hit Tier 3, especially for Zerg, it kind of feels like they stop being as complete a race. And I think that is... like I plan the Tensender for Terran and the Hypnagogue for Terran, and it's like, okay, there's those 2 units that are planned, and like maybe we also want to add like more missile types to the Anvil and all sorts of other things. But at the end of the day, Terran is the most complete, Protoss is pretty complete, and Zerg is the least complete, although I think they're still fine. It's just like some of their endgame options feel like they could use some love, not just visually looking at like the Mortothricore or the Exitralisk, but also in terms of like the mutations and stuff like that. I don't know. Like, it feels like for all the people saying that, like, for example, Protoss feel like they get outscaled by the end of the game, Zerg doesn't really have that many options. It's just that they have some pretty good ones, but like those are it, right? So definitely something that we want to adjust and essentially like finish over time. Something that I think will be nice. And when it comes to factions and stuff, well, I used to have a different feeling about factions than I do now. Basically, when it comes to the factions, I feel like we've already got so many units. Like, why do I need to design even more units? But like, designing units can be a joy, and especially if you don't have to worry about, like, you know, if you have a full concept of what the unit, like the reason why I think Terran has faction units and everybody else doesn't yet is because Terran is the most complete race already. So it's actually easier, paradoxically, to design units for a race that you already know the complete sort of play style for. And you kind of know, like, that's why the Terran tutorial is the easiest one to make, because I already know how Terrans play. Like, I know how they can play. And sure, people might invent new strategies and play styles, but they'll be riffing off of and built off of existing play styles that are already aware of. Like the Wraith play style, for example, with the Shaman healing and stuff. It's like, okay, but that's built off of the existing mechanics. Like, I know I don't think there's like something lurking around the corner. Maybe this is hubris, but I don't think there's something lurking around the corner where somebody is going to reinvent how to play Terran completely, and like you won't even be comparable to how Terrans play now. I don't really think that. I think you can probably get away with the strategies that are going to be winning strategies in the tutorial for Terran in competitive play as well, right? And that's sort of like the idea. And so anyway, it's easier for me to design custom units for that, faction units, because I know what will be good for the race, and I know like what will be good for synergies between the races and stuff. And so Protoss would be the next easiest to design for that, because again, they are the second most complete race. And then the Zerg are the least complete race right now. And so they would probably be the hardest one to design for. Maybe like tier 1 would be easy to design for, but like the later tiers wouldn't be. That would be like one way of thinking about it. And so I think some fun faction units would definitely be like leaning into certain cornerstones more. Like if we had brood spawn units in tier 1 other than the Zar-Ustaleth, like maybe there would be one faction that has like a replacement Hydralisk or something that does that. That there could be all sorts of fun things like that. There's the open question for factions, like if you replace the base strain, do you also replace the mutation? Probably, right? So that's something else to think about, is like, what if factionally like this unit has a replacement Skithicore, then it should probably replace the Vithrilisk as well, as an example. And so that might be something to think about. Like, whereas maybe there might be a faction that has a replacement Vorvrcore, but not a replacement Zethricore. Because it's like, my Zethricore's mutate into something else, like the only thing I would think of, I wouldn't want to do like minor stat changes where it's like this Zethricore has more movement speed for this faction, but for this other faction, it has more attack speed. Like, I wouldn't really want to do that. I think it's better to just have like, do you have the full unit? Like, do you have this unit or do you have that other unit? Like, that being the main thing, because that's a lot easier to understand. And so I would just end up changing the name and the unit and stuff, right? So anyway, faction units, I think for sure we should have like an infestation specialist at like tier 2 for a faction. I mean, we might even end up having that for the main thing too, but something like that could be cool. Maybe like a factional, I don't know, like I was thinking actually a factional Mutalisk could be neat if it's something that like instead of being like something that's more like it has more weapon range and maybe more durability, but you don't get 2 per rec. So it's like, you pay more for a single unit. It feels less swarming then perhaps, but it's still something to think about. That could be another thing to play around with, is like maybe there's a faction in general where all of the 2 per rec units, like the Zethricore, the Quasilisk, the Nathrcore, maybe all of those get revised. But then it feels like you're consolidating a lot of power or a lot of the factional differences into the one structure. So I wouldn't necessarily be super happy about that. But it's something to think about. Like maybe just some of their 2 per rec units are taken care of. Like the Zethricore would be factionally replaced, and the Mutalisk. And, I think the only other one that's 2 per rec later into the game is the Exetrialisk 2 per rec. The Exetrialisk is 2 per rec. So maybe that would be one thing, right? So there's like all sorts of different things to think about. And my general idea is that you replace 2 units per tier. And so the idea being that, like, for example, if you go to the Terran faction, for example, the Hekaton Coalition, well, right now it only has the hotshot for the Maverick. So let's go to the upstarts. So the upstarts have the Southpaw for the Goliath and the Wendigo for the Azazel, but they don't have a Raider unit replaced, right? And maybe they will. Like maybe the Shaman could be replaced for them, or the Cyprian or something. it's still an open thing. So maybe I would do 1 unit per tier, 1 unit per branch per tier. But if I do that, then does that break with Zerg? Because if you replace the Zethra you also want to replace the Vorv. And then you have 2 units in one spot. So then you can't also replace the Hydra, or you'd have to replace the Bacillus. And so there's all sorts of things like that. But I think the faction unit concepts that I have in mind right now are definitely things that are like crazy what ifs, but ideally still balanced, right? Like roughly, because this mode is now available in multiplayer. And so I would want to make sure that that is a thing that you can do. And so, like, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Obviously, some units are going to be a little bit different. Like, I can replace the Izira at tier 1 for... if the idea is that 3 replacements per tier, then the Zethra Vorva Izira those are all options that you could replace, right? And so that could be kind of interesting. Because, that would mean that the Zarka Shroud is identical for that race. At least that faction at tier 1, right? But maybe the Ultrav Cavern is different. So maybe, like, the Ultra Core is replaced. I don't know. It's like an interesting idea. So... I'm trying to come down on like how, like what would be the design philosophy behind the factional stuff. I'm not 100% sure. And I wouldn't want it to be super busted because it's available in campaigns, it's available in scenarios, it's available in multiplayer if you just select faction wars. So I wouldn't want you to basically be like, here's a unit that's super busted. And it just makes it not very interesting, even if it's, not a competitive mode, or not even versus players, like even if it's versus AI. Well, if the AI is using the super busted unit, then that's probably not fun for the player. And if the player is using it, then it trivializes the engagements with the AI as well. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I am interested in doing more factional stuff. I think maybe like the Fast Zealot version, the Imperious March Zealot version could be a factional unit for the Protoss. I don't know, like there's a couple of options there. And you have to also consider which faction you're thinking about too. Like when it comes to the factions that you have in the context of Chrysiliant, right, in our setting, if you look at the factions for Protoss, for example, you've got Divine Primacy, which is the melee tech tree. You've got Order of the Sacred Templar. Well, they would replace a lot of their Templar units, their biological units, I guess, with non-Protoss combatants, right? And so you might see like Legionnaires be robotic for that particular order, right? For that faction. And then when it comes to the Calendric Knights, well, they would actually want more spammability and maybe more like upfront power and less nuanced power. So their Hierophant would probably be different. They would probably have like a longer range, almost like a souped up Drakodin or something for the Hierophant, is my thinking. Because they would like what the Drakodin represents as power, and then they would want like a more powerful option. Instead of having the nuanced sort of thing, it's like, no, let's just supplement power with more power, right? Something like that. Maybe it would be area denial or something, like it would leave behind a damaging field on the ground with its attack or something like that. And maybe they wouldn't care if it dealt damage to allies. And sort of, it's like if you field this unit, you probably also want Ecclesiasts or some other frontline that can, some helpful frontline thing, stuff like that. And when it comes to the Zerg, we've got like the Imicrania tendril is the smallest tendril, or one of the smallest tendrils ever cataloged. And so maybe in that situation, they would have, less 2 per requisition units. And there's also, that's the assimilation focused tendril too. So it's like, okay, if that's the case, then maybe we have access to, I don't know, like there's just, it's interesting to think of for that sort of thing, because maybe when it comes to the, those kinds of things, you could actually have like a tier, like the Zorusaleth could be replaced with an assimilation infestation type thing, right? So that could be kind of interesting. And then, you think about sheer numbers, the Gazirith tendril. Well, maybe they have a factional Hydra that's 2 per rec, or, Zorusaleth that's 2 per rec, or something like that, right? That could definitely be a thing. Or Cody is about siege warfare and extended battles, so you might have like more durable, less upfront damage on a lot of their fighters. Maybe some more drain tank sustain things like the Tetzoracor, stuff like that, right? And so I don't know. There's definitely a lot of potential there. Like the Zorthos tendril, the last one that is documented is about area denial, right? It likes its area denial, so there could be that. I'm not ruling it out either that the Imicrenia Tendril, being an assimilation expert, might actually deploy, assimilated units. Sort of how like the Nidus Trinity has the cohort and the Tarask, and they're like clearly like Zerg-ish Terran units. There might be, Terran-ish and Protoss-ish and Ascozi-ish Zerg units, right? That could be like a cute little thing to do for the Imicrenia Tendril, but I'm not 100% sure that we'll be going for that yet. So let's wait and see, I guess. But yeah, I'm always excited to do stuff like that. I think, sort of like making content, making campaigns, it's something that I haven't done for a while now. Like I've been working on the tutorials and the various campaigns, but it's not like been a full day in, day out focus. The same is true for designing tech trees. I haven't done that as a full day in, day out focus for a while. And the faction units, they bring me back to that. So I really like the idea of messing around with the factions and making some progress there. And I am delighted to have people join me for that. So there will definitely be some streams and some work on that and stuff. And if you are one particular equipable clown emoji, then I know you're happy about that. But just in general, I'm loving the idea of delivering that to the homies, and it's something that will continue to bring me joy anyway. So stay tuned for more content creation and tech tree creations, concepting streams. And now it's time for those coffee questions. We have a couple of options to go down here. We've got a number of questions here from various people. And of course, I want to wish a very Merry Crowmas, a very Merry Christmas to all the homies, all the Chromies, regardless of whether or not they have sent in money. But especially for those guys who have been donating, I do appreciate it. It has genuinely made a qualitative difference in not just my personal life, but also my work. I've been able to work more because of that. I've been able to take time off of the part-time and not stress out as much about finances and stuff like that. So I do genuinely appreciate it. And I am happy about the direction of the work as a result. I think everybody else seems to be getting a good amount out of it. So yeah, appreciate the moolah. The Shambler is the one to kick us off. And he says, or asks, do you intend to experiment with a third additional health type other than shields and health for your future projects? Well, I'm not sure that they would stack up on top of each other is the thing. Because what I would imagine here is like, in addition to shields and health, which are your two health-based resources in CMBW and in StarCraft in general, would there be an overshield of some kind that goes on top of shields? Well, maybe. But I think it would probably be, I guess technically we already have the energy shield of the Anseal. And so when you shield, when you put the Anseal over a unit that has shields, then you actually do get that benefit, right? And so you kind of technically do have that third health type there. So in a very technical sense that is true. There are things that are outside of shields that technically could be passed on. Like if you think about the Keltar, they have this, they have a couple of units that have the rage shield, the rage barrier. And when that is used in an aura, it projects it to all nearby allies, including, mechanical stuff, right? And so that would mean that in a team game with Keltar and Psychora, who have more like quintessential shields, you might see three levels of health. You might see the baseline health of the Psychora, the shields of the Psychora, and then the Keltar rage barrier on top of that, right? And so like these would not, it's not like the Keltar shield is the same thing as the default shield, but by itself, it's not going to necessarily stack on top. Like maybe the Psychora or some other race might have, some other regency might have the ability to project shields on an ally, like Defensive Matrix, for example, in StarCraft 1. And that's another, like, technically, you can put that on a Protoss unit and have 3 levels of health, even though the D-Matrix isn't, like, displayed on the command card or anything, on the stat panel. But when it comes to thinking about the third additional health type, or like its third/additional health type, I don't know if I would want it to be in the context of like having 3 of them on one unit, like as a commonality. That should almost, in my mind, be a special case, like the Anseal, right? Or like Defensive Matrix. I feel like it's probably not super great for like unit clunkiness, or for like UI consolidation and stuff, and for, seeing that kind of thing. It might be best to just conceptualize them as extra shields, if you know what I mean. I don't know. It's something to think about. But I guess what I'll say is there's going to be more ways that you can engage with shields than just having plasma shields like Protoss do. So in that way, I think spiritually the answer to this question is yes. But will they show up as an additional type on the UI? That remains to be seen. That's based on, is it going to be good for the user interface itself? To like, is it going to make sense visually? Is it going to be readable? That sort of thing. So yeah, I guess if I should probably ask people for more context on their questions, because there's been a couple of times where it's like, okay, I can answer this, but maybe the answer isn't super good without me being able to make, to get more information about it. So anyway, hopefully that does answer the question. And if Shambler needs more, then he can post a comment and I will reply to the comment with more of an answer. Hopefully that is enough for the homie. Now we'll move on to Lucifirius, who asks, what mechanics would you like to implement or experiment with, but can't because of Brood War engine limitations? One of the things would be like, actually sort of downstream of the last question, talking about health and shields and stuff, behaviors that increased maximum health or maximum shields, allowing you to have an over shield or over barrier, like I guess overshield is probably the technical term for that, but it's like, there was an idea for a Zerg unit, the Khaz'it Cesian, back when it was called I actually can't remember the old name of it, but there was like, it was before it was even called the Khaz'it colony, because obviously Khaz'it was the previous, it was Casmal, the Casmal colony. So back in those days, this is like iQuare days, right? So we're talking like 2019, 2020, back in those days, I had this idea for a unit that would give you like overheal, basically. So you could get up to like 20 extra health on all of your units. So you'd have this like barrier, right? And you can't actually do that very easily in Brood War. Now, I think Veek said that he would be able to do something like that, but we never did end up implementing any system for that. And it's basically like being able to have extra max health, but for one unit, apparently is a very difficult thing to do, because it was actually going to be an upgrade back when we had upgrades as well. There's going to be an upgrade, I think, for Firebats that gave them like 20 bonus health or something. And just to do that was like a ridiculous amount of work. So that's sort of what I'm going off of when I say it's really difficult. It might not actually be that difficult, but that would be like one such thing that I would like to experiment with, is like an aura or something that allows for overhealing, stuff like that. What else? I guess obviously like air unit stacking. I would love to experiment with not having that, because it would be an experiment. What happens when you don't have air unit stacking or even worker stacking? What happens when you have good enough pathfinding for those sorts of things? Well, we can't even try to solve those technical problems in Brood War because of the engine limitations. And then after that, we would still need to solve, does it actually add to the game? So yeah, there's definitely stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, I usually don't think in terms of like for whatever that's like not possible in the engine, like player limit raising and stuff like that. I usually just like silo off and stop thinking about. So I'm very much a product, like my thoughts on mechanics within CMBW are very much thoughts that I have in the context of like, here is what is possible. So I'm very much like a product of that environment. So it's hard for me to answer this question, but those are a couple of examples. I think like the pathfinding stuff would be really cool to experiment with. Like, what happens if you make the pathfinding generally better? Is it, what happens to the player skill expression, right? Stuff like that. As far as like mechanics go, definitely auras that raise maximum health or shields. I think that would be really interesting to play around with, and it's something that isn't possible easily, as far as I know. I guess one of the things that I wanted to do a while ago, the Protoss tech map revision, tech tree, like teching up revision goes here as well, because the AI can't handle it. So we would need to completely overhaul how AI are handled. But there's also other things, like I remember one of the things that I wanted to do was make it so that Psystorm was like a unit that moved around, and the Cantavis could like issue an order to change the order target of the Psystorm while channeling it. And I think that seems to be like really difficult to implement. So that might not be feasible. That's something that I wanted to experiment with, basically like having casters channel to create movable spell effects. And these abilities these ability effects being able to, move around the map, irrespective of the position of the caster or something like that, could be really interesting. So yeah, there's a couple of things there that I think, as far as I'm aware, we cannot do these things because of the Brood War engine limitations. So there you go. That is the most succinct answer to your question I can come up with. Myrian asks, if you were forced to play an RTS other than Brood War or Cosmonarchy, which games would you choose? Or it's actually not an RTS, it's just play RTS, so just in general. So, of the games I've played so far, I think I wouldn't mind going back to try more Jurassic War 2, even though it's not a very good game, it's a very goofy game. So I would probably try some more of that. I would say I would like to... I wouldn't mind going back to play more Red Alert 2, because even though I'm not a fan of the subject matter or like the setting or like the window dressing or whatever, I think that that stands out as the better gameplay experience I had with any of the Command and Conquer games. So that's whatever. I don't know. It's kind of neither. It's kind of, I don't think it would be super good, but at least then I would be able to like remind myself more clearly if this was the better game out of all of the games that were made in that franchise. And I'm not including Generals because I guess, you could add like all the games I haven't played yet, like Generals and I don't know. There's a couple other ones like Tooth and Tail. You could definitely go through that list and say like, here's games that I haven't played yet that I probably should, just to see what they're like. I kind of want to play that Doom RTS because it's just so wacky to me to think that somebody made an RTS in Doom. That seems really wild and probably not very practical or playable. But as far as like if I was going to play an RTS more consistently, like what kind of RTS game would I play? Like if I was just going to play it every so often, or like, however often I play RTS games. Because I don't actually play Brood War anymore either, by the way. I only play CMBW as far as RTS titles are concerned, unless I'm doing a Let's Play of like 5 Nations or whatever. So if I was going to play a game with some consistency, which one would it be? I might just say Warlords Battlecry 3, because I have some nostalgia for that franchise overall, but it also has a lot of different things that can happen with it, and there's a pretty large-scale overhaul mod called The Protectors by a community member known only as Patrick, but he has been hard at work on that with a group of people. It's kind of like CMBW is to StarCraft, as far as I understand it, and I have played it a little bit, but I played an older version. So who knows, like what version, what the current version looks like. But I would probably play that game and, that mod as well, just to see what's up. And yeah, I guess, that's probably what I would pick. Mostly because there's so many different things that can happen. Not all of them good, obviously. Most of them not so good. That like at the very least, I kind of already accept that game for what it is. So it wouldn't bother me that it's bad or not as good as it could have been or whatever. Yeah, there you go. Some copium, perhaps. Now, Alexhandr asks a question here, but he asks a very interesting question because there is no question. He posts, just want to wish you all, he says, no question, just want to wish you all and all the homies here a wonderful and Merry Christmas. Well, dude, Merry Christmas, and thank you for hanging out. I actually just received a generous dono from Alexhandr, and I appreciate him even without that, but shout out for that as well, and hope you are doing well. I actually really wanted to see Alexhandr in this Winter Invitational, but he didn't sign up, goddammit. So we'll have to get him in on the next one. Meanwhile, 3Crow is here, as always, to play us out with the final question. He asks, do you have any plans for future or current advisors? And is it possible to change the portrait used when an advisor is speaking to the player? Well, I think on the portrait question, it's probably pretty trivial. I actually don't know the answer to this question off the top of my head, but I'm almost certain it's possible to change the advisor. I think they do that in StarCraft anyway. So like changing the advisor seems like it's something to do with a global or some other thing you could just set. So yeah, at some point I think it would be good to do. It would basically change the building portrait depending on your advisor. Now we would have to do that for all players. So like if I select your unit or your structure and I see the Mesk portrait, then that's like, okay, he's using the Mesk advisor, right? Otherwise it would show my advisor on your unit, which wouldn't work. Like it doesn't make sense. But you know, like that's something kind of funny. And as far as plans for future or current advisors go, I think just like a normal ProNoGo advisor would probably be fine. Like I have some funny lines or whatever. So that would be good. I think, you know, advisors of certain outspoken community members isn't out of the question, right? I'm not sure. Like usually advisors in RTS games are, if there's like customizability there at all, are sold. They're actually microtransactions. And then like the people who give their lines, like say it's like an Artosis or Tasteless or whatever, like some big caster guy or some community figure, they actually get a cut of the money that the users are buying. And that's actually, by the way, sort of a like completely tangential to the point. If I was going to enable or allow microtransactions in a game, it would probably be like esports related. It would be like you can buy a skin of a player or of a team or something like that. You can buy, like I'm thinking of an FPS game here because that's like Counter-Strike, right? But like you might see like weapon skins for that, or you might see advisors for like casters, you know, and maybe like the favorite unit. Like if say like imagine, you know, in Cosmonarchy retail, which is not going to be called Cosmonarchy, but like whatever, then like the you know, the not Madrigal is Nablime's favorite unit, and Nablime wins a tournament with, and like then he like picks that unit to get his skin. It's like, okay, the world championship, like the winner of the world championship gets to pick a unit and have like a custom skin for it, and that unit is going to have like certain details about it altered with the skin, and then like you pay like $1 or something for the skin, and like, you know, that money goes to the guy, you know, stuff like that. That would be something that I would consider. I still wouldn't want to accept any money from the microtransaction, because if I did, then there would be like, you know, if it's just genuinely a pleasant, aesthetically pleasing skin and people want it, then they would buy it regardless of wanting to support the guy, right? And then I don't know how that would work out actually, but it's something to think about. I don't know. Maybe I would take like 20% for the company, which means we're making like 20 cents off of the interaction. I don't know. That's still kind of shit. I'm still not sold on that, but that would be the one thing I would have some potential to see the value of microtransactions is, if it was like related to community and esports and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, if other people are getting the money and you just want to support them, then that's fine, you know. And if you want to support us instead, you could just donate instead of fucking buying shit. I don't know. Or you can spread the word about the game, and then more people will buy it, and then we'll get more money that way. That's also fine. But yeah, as far as current or future advisors or whatever, like adding more, myself, other people in the community, those would be the main ones. I guess we could have more like funny characters. We could have like more people from Ahmed's campaigns and stuff. Ahmed's adventures. I guess we could have like it's kind of funny to imagine that we could have like a Jay Barino advisor or something, but like I honestly haven't talked to that guy or looked at his content in years, so I have no idea what he's doing. But we mended fences a long time ago privately, so like there's no actual bad blood. We could have a Necron advisor in a similar vein. That would be pretty funny. I don't know. There's like shit like that that's amusing to me. It's like, all right, yeah, we can just like grab random people from the community and from I guess StarCraft custom content writ large, and maybe think about doing that. But I don't know. It would have to be somebody who's actively involved in the community. So that would be what I would say. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are on the table. I guess it's a question of what do people want, you know? So let's just wait and see, I suppose. And actually on that note, I can also add this to the list of topics here. I'm interested in a sort of something that 3Crow mentioned sort of offhanded, was like maybe you could you could find whoever donated the most throughout the year and like do something special for them or whatever. And I'm thinking maybe one of the things that we should start doing is if you are donating at a certain tier or whatever, then you get to like vote on what, like I compile a list of things and you get to vote on like what the first thing, like what is the priority basically, like sort it by priority. And it's like that month's tasks or something. And it's like, okay, what's the first thing that we should be doing? And so like, maybe then it would be like the coffee tasks would be like, add another advisor, add another faction unit, or whatever, like some small shit like that like is doable within a month, where the whole list is doable within a month. Right. And it's like, okay, what can we do there? And then like, if I compile that list and then people can vote on it, it's like, okay, great. Then that's sort of like keeping everybody happy. It's just something that made me think of when he was saying you should do something for everybody. I do think that we could basically have like everybody who's donated, basically they could get one yearly bounty, right? And then like at the end of the year, they basically just get to like one bounty without actually having to send us money. Cause that's like, oh yeah, you sent us all this money over the year or whatever. So stuff like that could be kind of neat. I'll think about that. If people have any ideas for that, leave them in the comments, let me know. And yeah, that's actually it. So now we have reached the point where I close out the show and I get ready to eat. I actually haven't eaten anything today and it's already 5:30 in the evening. Can you believe that? So I'm ready to go eat to break the fast, but I am hoping that you guys had a good podcast experience. I'm hoping that you guys have a very Merry Christmas, Crowmas, whatever you celebrate. Around here, we like crows. But yeah, stay tuned as well because Christmas Day, we always do a stream. My brother and I, we play some bad game live on stream for a couple hours. And sometimes we continue that playthrough after Christmas, but sometimes we don't. I think last year it was like, we tried a bunch of different games, and one of them was Halo Infinite. So that was funny. And yeah, so we'll also join us for another episode of Prototype. 38 will be a retrospective on the year and looking forward into the next year. So I don't know when that will happen, but at some point soon. And yeah, thanks for all the support throughout the year and especially around Christmas time. GG's.